Okay, let's open to 1 Peter. And as we open to 1 Peter, how many of you were on the east side last night? How many of you were on the west side last night? How many of you haven't heard any of this I'm talking about yet? Okay. I saw you in the dining hall. You weren't listening. You guys, I love your humor. Okay, I'm going to just start from the beginning because I didn't have any pictures at east side. 1 Peter is where we're starting. Lord willing, I might be able to get to 2 Peter, but it's looking too good, 1 Peter is. But how to reflect Christ in a darkening, hostile culture. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about them. They were living in a darkening, hostile culture. Peter was ministering to people where there were everyone watching them to see if they were obeying the imperial edicts. And what was going on was the emperors were starting this. Well, they always had wanted to be worshipped, but they made it a law that you had to worship them. And that's what this group of people were facing, persecution for not worshiping the emperor. But in the world of the New Testament, when Peter wrote his 3 epistles, it was terrible. We think it's bad. I mean, we have all of the erratic climate we're going through. We have all the unrest that we've gone through the last few years. We have global problems. I mean, Bonnie and I are headed from here to the United Kingdom where they're saying that they aren't going to have enough fuel to make it through the winter. We're going to France and to Italy and to Greece where they don't have enough water and they're having wildfires and all the fountains are not running in a lot of the major cities because they don't have enough water to pump through all their fountains in their downtowns. And we think it's terrible and everything's going up in price, but it was terrible more than we understand for them. For half those years, the hatreds of Nero caused fierce persecutions. Believers were being killed. In fact, if you look sometime at Romans 16, Paul lists a whole group of people. Did you know that Paul wrote his letter to the Romans from Corinth? And by the time Paul gets as a prisoner, those are the people that are listed in Romans 16 that were being hunted down. In fact, half of the people listed in the end of Romans 16 most likely ended their earthly life in the flames or in the arena. And we've never gotten close to that yet. That produced for Peter, he finally came to Rome, and of course these are some of the kind of fanciful pictures. I mean, the catacombs, I've been in them many times. I've never found anything quite look like that, but it's what is represented. Peter was there, most likely teaching through what we know as the Gospel of Mark, as he was sitting next to Mark himself, who was recording the words and the beautiful memories of Peter and the inspiration of the Holy Spirit of God. But what we're studying is what God, through Peter, taught to these dear saints. And these are the 5 points we're going to cover in these 5 sessions. Number 1, live in hope. And I showed you last night, look at verse 3 of chapter 1 of 1 Peter. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And we're to live in hope every day. We are to be the most hopeful people that people know. We are to be the ones that people look to when they hear bad news to see how we responded to it. Because we are supposed to be living, talking, breathing, working, going to school, and living in the neighborhood reflections of Christ. In fact, Christian, that term, shows up in Acts 11 for the first time in Antioch, when the unsaved people used it as an epithet, as a disparaging term, as what we would call, a racial slur. They said, you're a Christian, which meant you're a little Christ. And the Romans crucified the first one, and we don't like you either. And it was a bad term. And it became the normal term for all these. In fact, one Roman writer called him Chrestus. He was writing to the emperor about the problems they were having, and he said, it's all going back to Christus, Christ, who was crucified, under Tiberius and Pilate and over in Israel. So we're supposed to live in hope every day, even when people don't like us. Tonight, we're supposed to submit to God. You know what Paul described himself as? A slave of God. You know what Peter said? I am one who am following Christ to death. He is the one who is leading my life. And so he wrote in chapter 2, we're supposed to submit to God every day. For me personally, and I did it again this morning. It was dark. It's always dark when I wake up. And when you get older, you just wake up, like Solomon said, at the sounds of birds or loons or whatever gets to you. But I get out of bed, and as soon as I establish firm ground, I pause on that circle, and I say, Lord, I want to focus on you today, and I want your kingdom to come in my life. That means I'm submitting to your plan. You know how David and Paul lived? They fulfilled God's purpose in their generation. That's what the Lord said, that David was a man after his own heart, and Paul was an under-rower of Christ. They did the will of God. So we're going to look at that tonight, how to submit to God every day. And then talk about Jesus. I mean, Bonnie and I regularly reload our track supply. We travel all over the place, and wherever we travel, we're always waiting for divine appointments. And in fact, yesterday, when we were driving, we stopped somewhere. I told Bonnie, I said, I have to go and get gas and do this and that, and I'll leave you here at this store. And I came back and I waited, it was supposed to be 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes, and then 20 minutes. And finally she came out and she was smiling. I said, tell me about it. She said, I had a divine appointment. There was no one else in the store. And she said, and the woman was so friendly that finally I just continued it right into sharing the gospel with her. And so, I mean, do you talk about Jesus? Do you plan about, is that on your schedule? I mean, is that something that you're aware of the very last time that you shared the gospel verbally with someone and were able to, even invite them? My favorite way of doing it is I say, is there anything that would keep you from calling out to Christ right now? Anything that would stop you from asking Him to save you? Do you know why most people never lead someone to Christ? They never ask them, would you like to call in the name of the Lord? Are you ready to fall before the only one that can save you? Are you going to grasp and hold on to that hope of salvation He offers? Number 4, expect persecutions. That's what chapter 4 is all about. Peter called it fiery. In fact, we were just reading chapter 4, the fiery trials that were coming. And then resisting the devil. And Satan is alive and well on planet Earth. The context, and I'm demonstrating to you a method of studying the Bible, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But the context of 1 Peter is Nero is starting to burn people. He was killing people sporadically, and even got to the point where he would dress them in animal skins and release them to run as fast as they could behind packs of wild animals, and the crowds would go crazy. The bloodthirstiness of the Roman Empire is, of course, legendary. This was Nero's home. He built a lake, you see, because he wanted to have, mock sea battles to watch while he ate dinner. He had a big palace, that Domus Aurea to the right. His palace is up on the left. In fact, you can't see it, but right under the word Colossus, if you look under it, there's kind of a golden thing. That was a 100-foot high. How high is this, Paul? Twice as high as this. Colossal statue of Nero, unclothed, of course, wearing, a laurel crown with a sun disk crown coming out of him, and he kind of postured himself as Apollo, the sun god and all that. And that's why the Colosseum is called the Colosseum, not because it's big, but because the Colossus stood there. And they drained the lake and built the Colosseum and changed the face of that statue of Nero to be Apollo, because they didn't like Nero. But did you think about how hard it is? See the context. You don't understand a passage fully until you get the context. What's the context? How hard was it to be a Christian in those 10 years that Peter is writing these letters? It's dangerous, but Peter boldly wrote to the saints of the Roman world about the life of Christ. That was the Gospel by Mark. And about how to reflect Christ to the very end of life. In fact, the verse that Paul read, it says that we're, in fact, I'll exactly read it in verse 7, because the end of all things is at hand. Peter lived like he believed that. Now, for him, it wasn't the end of the world, it was the end of his world. It was the end of Christendom having any freedom at all. But how do you reflect Christ to the very end? Either of your own life, or for us who live at what the Bible calls the end of days, how do we reflect Him? Well, Peter wrote these New Testament books. He became the most wanted man of his day. If they'd have had a Roman post office with, when I grew up, they used to have all these different, in the post office notices, federal notices, and if you were a wanted person by the FBI, Peter was most wanted. And he demonstrated holy boldness in everything he wrote. This is the Roman Empire. This is I love this National Geographic map. I used to collect them when I was a little boy. But the Roman Empire went from Scotland's border all the way to the Sahara Desert, crossed all of northern Africa, going up, it goes further to the right into Parthia, which is almost to the border of India. So that entire area. And so that's the geographic context. Peter, though, within that huge empire, wrote to a specific group of people. Chapter 1, and I read it last night. It says that they are in verse 1 in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. And so to arrive at the correct interpretation of any passage of Scripture, you should turn to the back and look at the map of your Bible. And so I put it up here. And Bithynia is at the top, and Pontus is below it, and Asia is off to the left, and Galatia is right in the middle, and Cappadocia is to the right. And there you see the group of people. I mean, every passage of Scripture is a message from God to a specific group of people. And the only way that you have a correct interpretation is know what God intended to speak to them. See, there is actually only one interpretation of every Scripture in the Bible. It's what God intended to say to that group of people. Now, there are thousands, millions of different applications because we apply it in our lives as we surrender to the Spirit. But there's only one interpretation. Now, scholars differ on what they think that one interpretation is, and a lot of it has to do with your theological background. But God isn't confused, and He has a singular desire of His message for every passage. And how do we get to that? Well, we have to study the context, the geographic, the historic. What's the historic context? Peter's in the middle of a great personal persecution. I mean, he's being hunted. How would you like to have Roman legionnaires looking for you and be so well known to so many people and writing books that are circulating through the empire? So Peter was the most well known of Christ's apostles. He's near the end of his public ministry. He's being hunted down, and he's a big target. And so that's why this letter has these, like Paul read, the end of all things is at hand. You can just feel it that Peter knew it was near the end. From this area he wrote to, we see in church history what is called the near extinction of the Christian church, of Christ Church, of pastors and Bibles and meeting houses. Nero started it. Domitian kind of highlighted it. He's the one that got after John. Diocletian finished it. Diocletian he's got the unusual pedigree, Diocletian the emperor, you see up there on the right, of being the only emperor that retired. Every other emperor either was assassinated, murdered by, his friends or something, or poisoned, or died in battle. But not Diocletian. He retired because he did everything that he wanted to do. I mean, he revamped the roads, he revamped the water system, he revamped the code system, he revamped the taxation system, and he dealt with the Christians. And he had three things to deal with Christians. Number one, he got rid of all their copies of the Bible. The Roman legionnaires went out and they destroyed every manuscript of the Bible that could be found. And when he got done, there is no pre-4th century copy of the Bible left. There is nothing. There is no Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus. All of them are after the time of Diocletian. There is nothing left of those original autographa complete copies. But you know what we do have? 25,000 fragments. Because the early church took them, divided them up, cut them into pieces, passed them out, and everybody had their part. And so scholars now are collecting all those pieces, and there are over 25,000 cataloged. But Diocletian did a good job destroying complete copies of the Bible. Secondly, he got rid of every pastor. He either imprisoned them or killed them of every church. And the legionnaires were so busy, they stopped fighting the Parthians, they stopped fighting, everybody, they just fought the Christians. And they hunted down the leaders. Then they finally hunted down where they met. And they destroyed the buildings where the churches met. And I shared on East Side that Bonnie and I, we were just at a refugee conference in England, but the one I was at before that was in Aqaba, which is in Jordan. And it was all church planners of the men who are planting churches following the ravages of ISIS that started whatever that was, about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's just, the effects of it are a lot of displaced people. And when I was speaking in Aqaba, I had these 5 men. They were all from Baghdad, or a city outside of Baghdad. And they had fled as ISIS came. They got the word ISIS is 40 miles away, 30 miles away. And they had a plan. When ISIS got 20 miles away, they put their children in the car. And what they had already planned, the only things they could take with them in the car, and they drove to Jordan. No passport, just their kids and their few things they could fit in the car. And when they got across the line, they were in no man's land. The Jordanians couldn't stop it. Actually, over 1 million people flooded into Jordan with no passports, no money, and fleeing for their life. And so we went there to train the Christians in that area. And I met with these 5, and it was a week-long conference. I ate a lot of meals with them. The Baghdad 5. One was an English, or not an English. He was a Iraqi, Arabic school teacher. He taught English, I called it, but he taught Arabic in school. Another one was a music teacher. Another one was a plumber. Another one was an electrician. And I don't remember what the 5th one was. He was too quiet. And I said, what are you guys doing now? They said, we live in a refugee camp in Jordan. I said, what is a refugee camp like? They said, well, the Jordanians have made concrete, like 8-story high cubicles. And they have internal stairwells. They have windows, but no glass in the windows. There's no plumbing and there's no electricity. And we cook all of our food down there, out in the street on fires. We carry our water up. We go to public toilets and we hang blankets, and we're thankful for a place that doesn't get rained on. I said, how many people live around you? They said, in our part, there are hundreds of thousands. They have several of these camps, 1 million people, but ours has several 100,000 in these cubicles. And I said, wow, what are you doing? They said, we're planting churches. They said, these people are hopeless, penniless. They have no passport. They have no plans for the future. Most of them don't have cars. They fled on foot. And they said, Islamic people drove them out, their own people. And they said, they're hopeless. So I said, what are you doing? They said, we're evangelizing. And so I was at a conference with over 100 men who were evangelizing, some in Lebanon, some in Syria, some in Iraq, some in Egypt, some in Sudan, planting churches. These are converts to Christ from Islam who are risking. It's so much like this first century. But Diocletian did it, and he finally gave up because the church, as you know, didn't go extinct. What's the social context? Peter chose one of the most difficult places to minister. When you read 1 Peter, the address there tells us he was writing to the most secular. So if you live in a secular part of the world, this works. The most secular part of the world, it worked. The most emperor-worshipping part of the world, the gospel worked. The most hostile to the gospel territory of the Roman Empire, it works. During COVID, Bonnie and I didn't even know about COVID. We were overseas. We were in Korea, I think, teaching when it just started. And we started seeing on the news, people really sick in China. And then we got back to America. And you know how it went in 2020. So we were already scheduled to be out in all these. I mean, I was scheduled to teach in Hungary, and then after Hungary in, Thailand. I don't remember, all these places. And suddenly our board called and they said, we're businessmen and they're not letting us out of our airports in our towns. They're stopping flights and everything. They said, we don't think you're going to be able to do that. You ought to get plan B. So I realized something was going to change. And so we started teaching in our basement. A group of volunteers came and turned our basement into a little studio. And I taught Isaiah, and then I taught Proverbs, and then I taught Revelation in our basement in March, April, and May. And as you all know, something happened to the whole world. Everyone was closed in. And for the last 18 months, we've been hearing about the people that watched the classes that I was teaching to 18 kids in Korea, or 40 kids in Budapest, or I was even teaching, kids in Florida and New York that were doing remote education, a couple hundred in New York and 150 in Florida. And those classes we put on YouTube, and Isaiah was watched 1 million times on YouTube. Isaiah, there's nothing exciting about it. Have you read Isaiah? I mean, 1 million times. And I was just watching. I thought, wow, I had 18 kids that I spent, 15 hours with, and then I posted them, and all of a sudden, who are these people? And so Bonnie and I started praying every night. I said, Lord, would you let us start hearing from these people that are watching these classes? The reason I'm saying that is, I said, the most secular, emperor-worshipping, hostile territory, immediately we started getting notes. One of our first notes was from Berkeley, California. You know anything about Berkeley? That is the cutting edge of American wokeness. And this person at Berkeley said, I'm full-time at Berkeley, and we don't have no students on the campus. And so I have to come to work wearing my mask, and I'm watching, and I started typing in, all kinds of stuff. And he said, the long story short is, I started watching Isaiah. I wondered what it was. And this man said, I got saved. He said, I went home to the woman I was living with and said, not the first day, but as he kept studying, he said, within the first 2 weeks, he said, I went home and I said, honey, either you're going to have to move out or we're going to have to get married because this isn't right. I thought, wow. Now, I didn't hear about all this until I got a note from him with a link. And he told the whole story. He said, I'm sitting at Berkeley, paid by Berkeley, watching videos because we had to be at work, and I was sitting there with my computer. He says, I get saved. He said, I consider you discipled me. I went home and shared my wife or my girlfriend, said, either you move out or marry me, but first you need to watch this video. And he gave her, my sheep hear my voice. She watched it. She came to know the Lord. And the link he sent was her baptism at a downtown San Francisco church that she showed up and said, I became a Christian. This guy on YouTube said I need to be baptized. So they got a horse trough and brought it into the church. And the pastor baptized her. And I thought, did you know the gospel works in secular, emperor-worshipping, hostile to the gospel parts of the world? Well, here's the summary. Peter spends 8 chapters in 1st, 2nd Peter encouraging early believers to endure persecutions and all the challenges of living out their faith. And then, when he got done writing it, Gospel by Mark, and then 1st, 2nd Peter, he was executed by crucifixion. Peter was martyred at Nero's circus, and I showed you last night. Right there it is. It's that little racetrack, which is right here. This is what the archaeologists say it looked like. It's a gigantic chariot racing circle with a spina. That's that little line down the middle where they mark the laps, and the chariots would go around it. And in the middle of the spina is a Roman obelisk that the emperors helped themselves to when they conquered Egypt. They hauled 7 of their obelisks out of Egypt and put them in all of their chariot racing places. And that obelisk, you can kind of see it's off center, a little left of center there, is still there. And it now is the focal point in the center of St. Peter's Basilica. And that's the place where Peter was crucified. That was just the beginning. Nero, who murdered Paul and Peter, following him, Domitian exiled John, and then Trajan and Marcus and Septimius and Maximus and Decius and Valerian and Valerian. But finally, Diocletian was the worst. And there were 200 years. And the reason I say that is because hard times are really on the horizon for us because of this. The invention of this connected, the portable electronic device connected the world. And now these are being tracked everywhere. And in fact, I was buying gas in Chiang Mai, Thailand, with my phone in my pocket, and Bonnie was in the car. I stuck the gas thing in after I poked in my card, and I instantly got a text from Chase saying, is that really you in Chiang Mai? As I was putting the gas in, they were checking my credit card and got me on my cell phone. Unbelievable. Hard times are on the horizon, so what should we do? So here we are. Those of you that kind of slumped into, I already know this. How do we get ready? Well, I say this. We get ready by surveying the whole Bible. It should be your goal that you have not read through the Bible because you're supposed to, but that you have actually interacted with all 1,189 chapters of the Bible. That should be a life goal. If you have a bucket list before you go to Machu Picchu or climb Mount Everest, you ought to say, I'm going to read all 1,189 chapters of the Bible devotionally. So you see there, get ready by surveying the whole Bible using the devotional method. Now, this is my personal method I use. Now, if you want to read about it, Rick Warren's very first book, Rick Purpose-Driven Warren, he was not famous when he wrote his first book. His first book is called Bible study methods. 12 Bible study methods. That's his first book. Sell it on Amazon. It's about $20. Do you know what the very first Bible study method he describes? It's the one that all the devotional writers have used that you've ever read. F.B. Meyer and, A.T. Pearson. All these people use the devotional Bible study method, which is this. You write a title for every chapter you read and a little summary of it. In other words, you in your own words, not for your English professor, but you read the passage through, you summarize in one sentence and add any context, any other contact with the historic, grammatical, whatever that you find. So that's the first thing you do, and that's just a sentence or two. Then, this is the heart of it, you find as many lessons and truths and doctrines as you can find. Now what I do, I always carry a study Bible with me. Now that we're on the road, I carry my 4.5-pound MacArthur study Bible inside my phone because they weigh our bags. You can only have 17.5 pounds in a carry-on on international carriers in between cities. And so Bonnie and I have electronified everything. So we take our study Bibles, or you can use, all kinds, Blue Letter Bible, Logos. But you find those lessons. I'm going to show you mine right now. And then you write an application prayer. Now, I practiced this when I was pastoring in Kalamazoo. I had 10 small groups, 30 different men. We met once a week. I spent every morning at 6-something, I was with one of these groups. And every afternoon I was meeting the working ones, at lunch or on their coffee break. And we went through the 52 greatest chapters of the Bible doing this for 2 years. But let me show you my journal. I typed it out, and I have exactly, you guys are supposed to be really gone, dust up the trail by 1:15. And so way before that, I'm supposed to stop. And so I have at least 10 to 12 to 14 minutes. Here's my journal. First, I read through 1 Peter, and I titled every chapter. And here, what God did through Peter. Live in hope every day. Submit to God. You've already seen this. Talk about Jesus. Expect persecution. So I did that. So see, here's my journal. I wrote 1 Peter 1 title, Living in Hope Each Day. Now every time, I always keep adding to my title, as pilgrims and strangers. Look what it says in verse 1. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the pilgrims. And immediately I started thinking of, look at chapter 2, verse 11, because I read this through. I saw it. It says, Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lust. And then back up from 1 Peter, Hebrews 11. And it says in Hebrews 11, if I can find it, pilgrims and strangers. Oh, there it is. It's in verse 13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but saw them afar off. They were assured. They embraced them. They confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims in the earth. So see this? Chapter 1 is all about what a pilgrim and stranger looks like. Then I wrote my little summary. Peter was writing to the heart of the Roman Empire. That's that geography. The place where everybody was watching once a year. These cities Peter was writing to, you had to walk through the forum and get your certificate that you were a good Roman citizen. Now the slaves didn't have to do this, and the prisoners didn't, but all the citizens of Rome had to get a certificate, it's called a libelli, that said they were bowing to the emperor. And all you did is you'd walk single file. There'd be a Roman legionnaire there. There'd be the town clerk. There'd be the person passing out the slips. There was a little bowl of incense, and there was a little fire. And you just walk by, pinching between your fingers, just like you would get a pinch of salt, in some cooking show. And you would sprinkle your pinch of incense over the flames. And you know what incense does when it hits flame? It just goes, it's just like a little puff of smoke. And this is a continuous, the entire population of the town was lined up. And they were coming through, they gave their names, so they were checking off who they were. They'd get the thing, they'd go like this, they'd hand them the slip and go on. It was very easy to do this and blend in. But what happened is, Christians said, I can't declare Caesar Augustus, Domitian, is Lord. Only Jesus is. And so Christians started coming up there and saying, I can't. That's what prompted the massive persecutions. So everybody was watching if you were a good, loyal, observant follower of the emperor. And if not, it was the one spot in the whole world of the New Testament where it was hardest to live for Christ. It was here there was the most... See, they didn't do this incense thing everywhere in the empire. This was kind of the stronghold, Roman Asia. This is where the biggest temples were. This is where it was most Roman of Rome. And this is where Peter was writing. The most intense pressure existed for conformity to Rome. And Peter describes the life of a pilgrim, which we read just now in Hebrews 11:13 and 1 Peter 2:11. By the way, who is Peter? I even had to spend time to reassociate myself with Peter. Now, I made this chart just because I go overboard on everything. The chapter of Acts, the Roman emperor, the Roman governor, the date, the events, and who was the focus. And you see across the bottom, Peter is kind of the focus of Acts 1 through 12. And, the emperor stays the same, and the prefects stay the same, and all the events, But look at this. Something happens in chapter 12. Peter kind of moves out of the limelight, and Paul becomes the focus. And so basically, from that and all the other stuff, I made a little biography of Peter. I said the life of Peter would have 3 parts. Each era of his life speaks of his love for Jesus. In the gospel I marked that he was writing in this time period, he's talking about how to walk with Jesus. And that's, when I teach through Mark, I love teaching through Mark, I say it's walking with Jesus. And it's the fastest moving of all the Gospels. In the book of Acts, the first 12 chapters, we have a record of Peter working for Jesus. But from Acts chapter 12 on, Peter's out of sight. I mean, he shows up briefly in 15 at the Jerusalem Council. He shows up a little bit in Galatians 1 when Paul rebukes him. But we don't know anything about Peter. He's out of the limelight. What's he doing? From Acts 12 onward, through the epistles of Peter, we have Peter waiting for Jesus. And that's why I love Peter's writings. It shows how to wait for Jesus when you're not the center of attraction, not the one everybody's hounding. I mean, Peter just continued serving the Lord when Paul took the spotlight. And that's hard to fade out when someone else, when you were the main one. So let's look at lessons. So here's my Bible, and I take my journal, and I read 1 Peter 1 and 2, and I've read them to you several times. And look what I wrote. We are pilgrims. Now remember, you're supposed to write a lesson, a principle, a truth. So how do you get ready for darkening times? Peter said, number 1, we're pilgrims. What does that mean? Well, look at verse 2. Elect. What is elect? Ek lego is the Greek word. Ek means out. Lego means to be called. An elect person is someone who got called. You ever been, called, said, hey, come on up front, do this, do that. You're called and you respond. We were chosen. So I wrote, we're chosen, we're saved. We were sent to be, look what it says. Elect according to the foreknowledge of God. What is foreknowledge? Pro gnosko. Pro means before, gnosko means to know. Foreknowledge. I mean, that's actually a good translation. Of God the Father. In sanctification of the Spirit. What is sanctification? Literally, it means to be set apart and to be holy. But do you know what it really means? To be useful to God. Did you know the goal of life is not to have the biggest 401k or 403b? It's to be most useful to God. There's a little chorus. The greatest thing in all my life is knowing you, loving you, serving you. And so we are chosen and saved and sent to be useful to God the Father wherever we live. So Peter says, you guys happen to be living in Roman Asia. You're living in the epicenter, in the most intense place of pressure. And so God wants you to serve. That's sanctification. He wants you to be useful. How do you do it? Well, back to verse 2. By the sanctification of the Spirit. It's only the Holy Spirit that can give us boldness. Now, I'm always telling about sharing tracts. I can tell you about a time I didn't share a tract. We got home from one of our trips in July, and we were only home for a very few days, and something broke at the house in Colorado we're never at. It always is breaking. We're not even there. And so we had to call a repairman, and it's so far from everywhere that it's 2 hours. I mean, we have to drive 1 hour to find, any size town. But if you want everything, like Home Depot or something, you have to go 2 hours to Farmington. And so We called this repairman for 2 hours, and he's charging $1, not 55 cents a mile, $1 a mile to drive to our house. And he's charging $135 an hour to work. And he comes in, and I can just see the dollars going like this. Have you ever paid someone $135? That's more than $2 a minute. It's like $2.25 a minute. And he's there, and I'm saying, this is the problem right here. And he goes, I just got back. I'm a vet, he said, and I just got back from duty. He says, it's just fried my mind. He said, I've seen all these people blown up. And that was $6.75. And so I said, thank you for your service. I said, it's right over here. I said, do you need a screwdriver? And I was down there like this. I was helping him unscrew it. And he had his little thing, and he got the panel off, and he said, it's kind of frightening. You're always wondering if one of those IEDs is going to get you. Do you understand what's happening? I had a little appointment right there. I said, yeah, those IEDs are great. I said, do you need another screwdriver or something? 2 hours later, it took him 2 hours to fix this problem. It really, as he was packing up his stuff, and I finally had Bonnie go out because it actually bothered me. I could have fixed that in 20 minutes if I'd had his tool. I never gave out my track. Do you know why? I put a price that I wasn't going to talk. I thought, if I start talking, this guy, I don't even know him, and he talked for an hour and 40 more minutes than he should have talked. If I got into the gospel, because you know what he said? He said, I have all day scheduled for this call. He said, I drove 2 hours to get here. He said, I can work with you all day long. I said, I only need that one part fixed. Why I'm telling you that is, it's not always that we're hep on sharing the gospel. And sometimes, sadly, that's the first time it ever happened to me. I didn't talk to someone because I got bothered by the $2 a minute thing, and it was too much. But we're supposed to be pilgrims, useful, and by the power of the Holy Spirit who makes us bold and makes us not care if it's $2 a minute to witness, we obey Christ and we're cleansed by Him. Here's my second observation. Look at verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to His abundant mercy begotten us again to living hope. What I wrote is this: we're to live in hope. Because Christ's resurrection, we await a never-tarnishing treasure. It's reserved in heaven by God. In fact, that's a witnessing tool. I talk to people and I say, do you know if you're going to heaven? Oh, yeah, I'm going to heaven. I said, do you have reservations? They go, do you need reservations? Everybody uses Kayak or, Google Airfare or whatever. We need a reservation. Do you have one? Do you have a reservation in heaven? And we're kept by God's power through all we face in life. So, first, Peter teaches us we're pilgrims. Second, I learned we're to live in hope. Here's my third one. Look at verse 6. Trials refine us. In this you greatly rejoice, verse 6, though now you for a little while, if needs be, you have been grieved by various trials. That the genuineness of your faith is more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire. Fiery trials. Wow. Might be found to the praise and honor and glory. And what I wrote in my journal is, trials refine us. And then I wrote, you remember how the fiery furnace only burned away what kept the 3 Hebrew young men from walking with the Lord? Do you remember they were thrown in bound? And what did the fire burn away? Only what kept them from walking around with the Lord. And so trials are to refine us so we can better walk with the Lord. So God offers inexpressible joy. See what it says? That we might have much more precious than gold, though it be tested by fire, may be found to praise and honor and glorify, whom, verse 8, whom having not seen you love, and though now you don't see Him, yet you believe, and you rejoice with joy inexpressible. So I wrote, God offers inexpressible joy. Did you know that's why we're not evangelizing a lot of times? We don't have inexpressible joy. If you're like me in July, you're thinking about the $2 a minute meter. Maybe you're thinking about your friends won't like you. They'll make fun of you. Maybe you won't get that position, or if you speak up for the Lord, you'll be skipped over in the job. But we can have inexpressible joys as we come to Him each day and say to the Lord, I'm unable to follow and obey you apart from your power, strength, and encouragement. That's God's grace. See, what the Lord wants us to do, and what I did this morning when I stood in the dark like this, I said, Lord, I'm surrendering to you because I can't make it through life without your power, without your enablement, endowment, your boldness, your grace. We need him, I wrote in my journal. We cling to him. We cry out to him like we see David in the Old Testament. And that's why, if you notice what Peter says, verse 10, this salvation the prophets have inquired and searched, who prophesied of this grace. Verse 11, searching what or what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them. But look at the end of verse 12, which things the angels desire to look into. And I wrote, that's why our salvation amazes the angels. They watch how closely the God of the universe is involved with each of us who ask him to be involved with us. Have you invited the Lord to be involved in your life? Have you said, I need you, I want you, I cling to you, I can't make it through life? Here's my fourth observation. Our minds need girding. Look at verse 13. Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind. This is an interesting word. Back then, people wore these robe things, and they had this kind of belt thing, but it was a long, flowing robe thing. And if men ran, they gathered up their robe and they stuffed it into their belt. And that's gird up. Our minds need girding because they can go everywhere. We need to choose where we focus. We have to choose to rest. See what it says in verse 13? Gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope. That's an imperative, by the way, a command. Fully on the grace that is to be brought about at the revelation of Jesus Christ. He keeps talking about that. He says, Jesus is coming. The end is near. You need to consciously focus. Now, when we were homeschooling, we had this thing called HomeSat, which was, for all the biology and physics and, whatever we couldn't teach, we would tune in. And I remember I got really good at all these things to find the satellite. They gave you a kit and you had to install that satellite dish and you had to look exactly and have it pointed the right direction. I became a connoisseur of people's satellite dishes. And you know what? If you drive down the street and you see one of those dish networks and it's like this, it's not working. It's not pointed the right direction. And so all of a sudden you start being conscious when you have a satellite dish that you've got to be toward your satellite. Well, you know what Peter learned? Our minds need to be tightened and focused. And we have to rest our hope fully on the Lord to resist aimless conduct. That's what burns up at the judgment seat of Christ. Number 5, look at verse 22. And this is actually, can you believe it? This is how I study the Bible. Every day. Trying to mine from every chapter, not something to share with you. See, that's the key. The goal, I remember John MacArthur telling me this, he says, don't try and live up to your preaching. He said, only preach what you're living. He said, we have too much secondhand information in the pulpit. He said, it has to be firsthand. You have to be experiencing it. The way we experience it, we come before the Lord and say, I believe that truth, and then I invite you to do that. And I'll show you that in just a second. But look at verse 22. Since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit, in sincere love of the brethren, love one another fervently with a pure heart, having been born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, through the word of God that lives and abides forever. Obedience, this is all I wrote for that whole section. Obedience purifies our souls. We're to love fervently. We're to be lovers. We're supposed to be the most loving people. It is God's word that birthed us and abides in us forever. And so here's my application prayer. I write one of these, and this is what I found. When I started my men's groups, the very first one, I'll never forget, it was 6 in the morning. It was 8 of the top businessmen of Kalamazoo. We were sitting around this table. And I said, what we're going to do is we're going to study our Bibles, and we're going to find these principles. And I said, here are the principles I found, and we're going to ask the Lord to do it in our life. And one of the men said, out loud? I said, uh-huh. He said, you mean I'm supposed to say in front of these guys what I want God to change in my life? He said, I don't do stuff like that. He said, in fact, we don't even pray out loud in our family. He said, we pray silently. I said, well, if you're in this group, you've got to pray out loud, and you've got to ask God to change you. And you know what? The first 3 weeks we met, it was really hard. The men would sit there, and they'd all, when it came to prayer time, and finally the guy that was the leader that thought of this whole thing, that invited me to lead the group, he said, guys, I know it's uncomfortable. I'm going to start. And he said, Lord, I read this chapter this week, and I see that I'm not that way, and I should be different with my wife and my kids, and I pray you'd help me. And boy, did that change the group. And we met for 2 years. And those men, I still get notes from them wherever I am in the world. Here's my prayer, and I'm going to pray it, and then before we go, so you can keep your heads up because I have to keep mine up. But this is what I said to the Lord. I said, Lord, help me to be a pilgrim each day by opening all of my life to your truth. I want to surrender to your Spirit to make me useful. Increase my hope and help me to cling to the reality that true treasure is with you. For Jesus' sake, amen. Now that's how I studied one of the 1,189 chapters. Tonight, we're going to look at how to submit to God. Tomorrow morning, Lord willing, how to talk about Jesus every day. Tomorrow night, how to expect persecution, what it's going to look like, and how to not avoid it, and then how to resist the devil. And here's my last slide. Everything that I teach, in fact, when I get done practicing on you, I already have some ideas. I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm actually going to teach this to the refugees. And when I get done teaching it, everything goes onto YouTube. It takes about a month because it has to find its way, through the airwaves back to our headquarters, and then they have to correct all my mistakes. But if you would like to learn how to start your lifelong goal of doing all 1,189 chapters, I'm going to show you for 5 times in a row how to do this. And I hope that some of you will say, you know what? Before I get to heaven, I want to have prayerfully read every chapter of the Bible, found every single truth, principle, doctrine, application, and then I'm going to pray and let the Lord do that in my life. Let's bow. Father, I pray that you would stir our hearts to love you so much that we are more than just hearers of your word. That we start becoming men and women in the word every day, not just getting it over with, but reading it with hearts open before you and saying, Lord, I want to hear what you're saying, and then I want to invite you to do that in my life, and I want to surrender to you changing me. And I want people to see me as the most hope-filled person that they know in their life. And when they have a problem, they'll come to me, and I can tell them about you. That's our prayer, and we offer this time, our weekend together, for Jesus' sake. And all God's people said,